Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is going to be a follow-up on the previous video, which was about sex. But this time I want to approach the subject from the perspective of virginity, virgins who get married. Now, of course, for us as Muslim people, that's usually the way that we get married, or we intend to get married anyway. Some people don't manage to do that and others do. But also because we have obviously a conservative culture in which we don't talk about sex ever, really. You find often that Muslim young men and women, they get married and they are absolutely clueless, as I was. When I was 22 years old and I got married, I knew absolutely nothing about sex. And neither did my wife, and we only knew that we were doing it right once she fell pregnant, because obviously then it must mean we are doing it right. But we knew absolutely nothing aside from what you learn at school in biology. There was, we just didn't know anything, which is not very helpful. When you obviously now get married and that's now on the table, you should know how to go about that. And we don't. Okay, so in my generation at least, I'm 41 years old now. So that was a pre-YouTube generation, or, the YouTube only kind of started out at the time. And there wasn't a lot of information available, but also there wasn't free access to pornography like there is now. And so we have a lot of young people, not married, young men, Muslim men included, who watch pornography, and their relationship with sex is with themselves, unfortunately, and also the expectation of women is unrealistic or unreasonable, because what they see in pornography movies, or whatever it is you call it, is obviously not going to be like what happens in real life. And so obviously, first of all, you should know that pornography is haram. You shouldn't be watching pornography to begin with. If you're having a problem with pornography, you need to figure out how to unhook yourself. One way to do that is to focus on exercise. Okay, so if you go to the gym, lift weights, you exercise, you run, you dedicate your life 2-3 hours a day to exercise, obviously you have a lot of free time because you're watching pornography. You cut those things out, you will live a much more fulfilling life, and also you will find yourself less in need of feeling sexually gratified, because you will have exhausted yourself in other ways. So it's very important for young celibate men to play sport and to focus on physical and mental development, rather than on their desire to want to have sex, which is obviously a natural desire, but it should just not be focused on at that moment, because there's no one to have sex with. It only makes sense to focus on the desire to have sex when there's someone to have sex with. When there's no one to have sex with, it doesn't make sense. It's a waste of your time and energy. Just forget about it. As difficult as that might seem, it's actually not. I know this personally, as a married man. In the times that I've been away from home, sometimes months at a time, sometimes as long as 9 months through celibacy. It's only hard in the beginning because you are used to having sex, but for a while you forget about it and it's not an issue. Okay, so what to do as virgins when you get married. So first of all, I talk about this in my book on how to choose and keep a wife, but let's go through the process first of courtship. Now, a lot of Muslims will tell you that courtship or dating, quote unquote dating, is haram. This is not true. It is not haram. There is an actual culture of courtship amongst Muslims in many Muslim countries, and also in many discussions on Islamic law. There is actually a chapter heading or a facilitation of courtship, just only it is not in the way that it is done in many Western cultures. So there is a man can who wants to get married can ask to see another man's daughter. This is fine. He can actually sit with her and talk to her as long as they're not alone together. And by alone together, I don't mean that you need to sit in their company listening to their conversation, but they just need to they're not alone together basically so she doesn't fall pregnant or they don't have unlawful sex. That's really the reason, okay? Not because they can't have privacy or they can't talk or they can't get to know each other. They can, it's just that this getting to know each other is also an above board thing. Like, people know that that's what's happening. You, the family, and her family, they know, okay, there is this guy that she's talking to, that she's getting to know. He's interested in marriage. She's interested in marriage. They don't yet know if they want to marry each other. It is not like the expectation that two complete strangers are to get married and then learn to know each other and then decide they don't want to be married anymore. That is not a realistic and reasonable expectation. It was never the expectation, even in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, there's lots of hadith on the topic. One, for example, when one man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, I'd like to marry this woman from the people of Medina, an Ansari woman. The Prophet said, well, have you looked at her? Because there's something about their eyes, meaning there's something that you might find that's not attractive or appealing in her, so look at her. Scholars have spoken about at length, various scholars throughout history, about the seeing of the woman. They call it the legal seeing of the woman before marriage, and they have even discussed the extent to which a man can see the woman. Almost all of them agree that the seeing of the woman before marriage does not require her to cover her major aura, meaning that it's not the seeing of the woman as she would ordinarily appear outside in her hijab and abaya, what she uses to cover her body, but it would be more or less as she would appear ordinarily in her home by covering the minor aura. And that is kind of the more or less the discussions, the Islamic discussions around that. You can look it up. I mean, some scholars even were as extreme as saying that he could see her completely naked. Not that is obviously not the view that has crystallized into the dominant view for obvious reasons, but there were even views to that extreme. So let's not try to imagine that the Islamic tradition, as it has distilled or crystallized in our time, is as it always was. First of all, it isn't, and also we have a much heightened level of conservatism today, much more than it was historically. We need to also know that we are sexually a lot more prudish, and even me myself, coming from a Muslim culture where we don't actually talk about sex, and all these things are kind of a taboo. It was not traditionally the case. Okay, so let us continue and say, okay, so for the dating and courtship process, it is not true that there is no courtship process in Islam or amongst Muslim peoples. There's various ways of doing it. One is which I just said now, where they get to know each other, but they are supervised and chaperoned. That is not haram by any stretch of the imagination. The other way is that if they want to actually be alone together because you don't want to chaperone them around, some people, what they do is they perform an aqdun nikah, which is the marriage contract, with a stipulation that the marriage will not be consummated, meaning they will not have sex for the duration of the period that they are getting to know each other. So they will get to know each other for 3 months or 6 months. They would technically be married, which will enable them to be alone together, to be without a chaperone, to go out. So he's taking his wife out. In other words, he's dating his wife, but without consummation, which means that the marriage is not ratified. The consummation ratifies the marriage, so that if after 6 months the two decide that, look, we don't want to actually, this is not going to work, then they can go their separate ways. No harm, no foul. In other words, she's still a virgin, and the next guy, the guy who's going to marry her, is still going to get a virgin, which is very important in our culture and dispensation. So that's another way they do it. You will find this in some Arab countries. They call it milka. It is actually quite common. So that's dating through marriage, but technically not fully married. Legally married, but not legally married by contract, meaning they have a marriage contract, but technically not fully married because no consummation has taken place. And that's also another issue that we tend not to understand in the law. When two people have a marriage contract, they agree to be married, they are married by contract, meaning that they are husband and wife pending the delivery of the agreement. This is not unlike any other agreement. For example, when you go sign the papers to buy a car, and that's a sales agreement between you and the seller, but you don't yet take possession of the car. You are technically, legally the owner of the car, but you don't own the car yet because you haven't yet taken possession of the car. Up until the time that you have not taken possession of the car, you can still cancel the contract in many legal systems. This is similar to the issue of marriage, and we can see that the Quran does deal with it in that way, in that it says that if a woman was not had sexually after the marriage contract, then she doesn't have to wait a waiting period. There's no iddah for her, and also there's the possibility of her returning the bridal gift, the mahar, in full or in part, or what is agreed upon between the parties. Okay, so you can see that it is not the full consequences of which the Quran at length discusses regarding marriage does not apply to a marriage contract that took place while the marriage wasn't consummated. So this is kind of how the legal thing works around marriage and sex. The sex is the marriage, in other words. I mean, in a nutshell is how you can sum it up. So when two people don't know each other, so let's say that you've spoken to each other, you like each other. The idea is that when you reach a point, especially the girl more so, reaches the point where she wants to have sex with the man, that's at the point at which the courtship ends and the marriage starts. Whether now it is the courtship within the marriage contract or a courtship outside of the marriage contract, that's essentially the process that is undergone in practice. Okay, some people who study or scholars, they don't obviously have a practical common sense approach to many things, unfortunately, but this is how technically it's done all over the world through various mechanisms in practice, because I think most people understand that you can't just expect people to see each other one time and then get married. Okay, I think most people do understand that, and so therefore these customs evolve to accommodate both the practical realities, to retain the woman's honor also, and to honor the vows that take place in marriage. Okay, so now how does this relate to sex? Of course, for us, there's only sex after the marriage contract, not before that. But then now there are certain considerations which I think a lot of young Muslim men don't know, and also Muslim women don't know because they don't talk about it. Okay. First of all, your wife is not the porn star that you watch on YouTube. Okay, that's not her. She's not going to look like some of these women online that use filters and all kinds of things. She's going to look like a normal person naked. She's not going to look like I don't know. I can't even remember which brand names or which actresses are like known to have been very sexy, because that's how long last I've actually even watched a movie. I haven't watched movies in years, so I don't even know. But she's not gonna look like whoever you fancy online, okay? Because she's a real, actual person. In fact, the person online that you fancy doesn't look like she looks like her pictures look like online, okay? So this is a false expectation. This is the reason why you should not be looking at those women, because it creates a mental image in your mind, a false expectation. You desire to have sex with the woman on Instagram who doesn't look like she looks on Instagram. Even if you saw her in real life, you probably wouldn't want her the way she looks like in real life, because you want the Instagram model, how she looks like on Instagram. And this is definitely 100% not going to be your wife, okay? Even if you married the Instagram model that you see practically naked, that's not how she looks like in real life, okay? So first, that needs to go, okay? Because otherwise, you basically, as young men, you're setting yourself up for disappointment by imagining that you're gonna have a wife that looks like that, okay? You're not, okay? She's normal. She's not a princess. She's not going to be sexy like that. She's going to be sexy because you are naturally designed to find women attractive, but not like that, okay? And she's a human being, okay? She's a human being in the same way that any other woman you might know, your sisters, your mothers, your aunts, okay, are. Okay, as annoying as you find your sister, you might find your wife further down the line. Who knows? Okay, because she's just a human being. And this is one of the problems that we have, of course, because people, obviously, in our cultures, we tend not to associate with women at all, really. I mean, who are not relatives. And so we objectify them and we sort of fantasize about how this woman might be. And then you're going to be very disappointed when you discover that she's just normal. Okay, and the same goes for the guy. Okay, the woman fantasizes about how amazing this guy must be, and then when you marry the guy, well, you're disappointed because he's just a normal guy, very similar to any other guy that you know. Okay, he's kind of like your brother or your uncle or any other man that you know, who half the time is fantastic to be around and the other half the time is annoying. Okay, so that's what you need to be realistic about marriage. Okay, so first of all, so get out of your head the fantasy, okay? I hate to burst your bubble, but, you know, there is nothing special about your husband that you marry or your wife that you marry, okay? And don't expect there to be, because that's okay, okay? That we are just normal people. People are just normal, and marriage is getting a roommate, essentially. You're going to live with a woman, that's it. Like how a lot of us guys, when we're studying, when we're at college, whatever, we live with our friends in a house, you know. You're gonna live with a woman instead of a man, that's it, okay? And then you're gonna be able to have sex with her, right? But it's not going to be what you have trained your mind to see in the haram things that you watch online, like the pornography and things like that. It's not gonna be that, okay? Number one. Number two, you have to consider, from the man's perspective, you have to consider the shyness of the girl, okay? If it's a good girl, like we say, bint halal, a good girl, she is going to be shy. Okay, she's not gonna come in on the night of the wedding, chuck her clothes off, and stand there naked on the bed and say, "Yalla, come." She's not gonna do that. Okay, because she has not, because she's shy. She has shyness in her, which is a good trait in a woman, and she has preserved herself all the way up until now, where no man has ever seen her, etc., etc., etc. Now she has to allow you to see her. All of a sudden, this is a big kind of a adjustment for any woman, and it will be a big adjustment for her as your wife. And although she is your wife and you have the right to be intimate with her, you need to be patient, especially regarding the first few times of intimacy. Okay, so you need to accept the possibility that it's not going to happen on the first night, and it may not happen in the first week, and it may not even happen in the first month. And as bad as that sounds, you need to allow for that. Why? Because sex has to be consensual, and many times in our cultures you kind of rushed into marriage. Okay, like you do kind of like the girl, maybe the father gave you 3 months, or he said you can see her 3 times or whatever. You do like the girl, it's not that you do want to marry her, etc., but it's easier for you to know as a man that you want to have sex with her. I mean, it's easy for a man to decide that and to know that. It's harder for a woman to decide that and to know that. So when the woman is now consenting to get married to you, although she is obviously consenting to have sex with you, that's not always uppermost in her mind as it may be in your mind as a man. Okay, so it hits her the night after the wedding. It hits her that, oh my God, this guy wants to sleep with me. Okay, that's when it hits the woman. She was too much engaged in the princess thing, right? She wanted to be a princess for the wedding, and she was worried about choosing dresses and shoes and this and that and having her moment. Okay, now your moment is obviously when you get her alone. Okay, but she wasn't thinking about that. And because sexual relations have to absolutely in Islam be consensual, and because this is the first time, you need to have patience. You need to have the patience. You need to woo her. You need to flirt with her. You need to take her out. You need to spend time with her. You need to talk to her. You need to do all the things that will warm her up and make her feel deeply inclined to having sex with her. And maybe what you need to do is you need to play with her. And this is the important thing, okay? So, like for example, if you decide to watch a movie, you will sit close to her. You will touch her hands, you will touch her feet, you will touch her arms. You will get her comfortable with being touched in that way. Do you understand? When you sleep next to her, you will play with her, like have sexual play. Play with her, touch her everywhere, make her feel that, get her to a point where she is basically wanting you to complete the act. Okay, where she's insisting on you to complete the act because you have helped her overcome her fear of the act. Because a virgin woman is scared, okay, because you are going to insert something into her body, right? This is not the, you need to let the sexual instincts and desires trump the fear. Now, we are not taught these things, by the way, when we get married, and then we just do it. As us guys, our girls are taught, in my experience even, as many women are taught, that look, you are married, and your husband has the right over you to sleep with you, and so you must just bite the bullet, as afraid as you are, and let him do it, whatever he needs to and wants to do, okay, and get it over with, okay? That's one way to do it, but that's not very pleasant. And obviously the other thing is, you also need to understand that she may not like sex in the beginning. Now, this is not because of you, it's because sex is painful for a woman when she's a virgin. Losing her virginity is a painful experience, and then sex is often painful it's long since I've been married to a virgin, like I've gotten married, so I can't remember exactly, but from what I remember, and from what women have told me, sex is painful in the first couple of weeks, basically, right? And so so as much as you as a man, obviously now having sex for the first time with your wife, and then wanting to have sex all the time, obviously, it's not painful for you, but it's painful for her. So if she has a bit of hesitancy towards sex, don't blame her for that, okay? So that's the other thing, right? That is fine in the beginning, okay? Now, where it becomes important to have sex on demand as a man, like your wife needs to fulfill your sexual desires, is after this phase, meaning that now she's opened up, now she is having sex regularly with you, now the sex isn't hurting. Now this is where it comes in, where she shouldn't refuse to have sex, okay? Because now she's opened up, you have opened her up. It's like, I hate to make this example, but I'm going to make it anyway. It's like when you buy a new car, you got to drive it in for the first 5,000 kilometers. They'll advise you not to drive it very hard, okay? But once you take it back and you do your first oil change, and the engine is now, they adjust the head, they retorque the head of the engine, etc. Now you can drive the car as hard as you want to, whenever you want. So basically, it's a very similar, maybe somewhat inappropriate analogy, because I'm comparing women to cars, but it's a one that you as a man would understand if you like cars, right? So this is an important aspect of the virgin sex thing when you get married as a virgin, okay? Your wife is a virgin, you're a virgin, you don't know what's going on, but now I'm telling you these are the things you need to do. Now, okay, now the other thing is, obviously you're a young man, you're a virgin, and your wife, and you're not, let's say you decide to take my advice, and you are just playing around with her a lot, right? You don't need to sort of be in a hurry also. So that's very important, okay? Because you need to temper yourself as a man, okay? So yes, you're enjoying yourself and your wife, but also you need to take time, like be patient about it. I mean, we even have this in Islamic literature, in hadith, where, you know, we have reminders about flirting with your wife, you know, sending messages ahead, you know, so that she can feel prepared. So throughout your kind of your experimenting with your wife, because it's an exploration, right? You just need to have that patience. Now the thing is going to flip eventually, okay? So you don't have to worry. Like, look, hopefully the intention is you're going to be married to this woman forever, right? So think about it that way. There's no rush. But eventually the thing is going to flip. When you do start out like this, very slow and very patient, etc., etc., once she's over the fear and once she's over the pain, she's going to be impatient. Okay? She's going to be the one that's going to be impatient, and she's going to be wanting things to happen a lot quicker. Okay, she's eventually going to come on board, in other words, with your original sentiments. Okay, so that is going to happen, but you need to take your time. Okay, then the other thing about sex and sexual relations and marriage, especially in conservative societies and especially amongst Muslims, is that a lot of our women, unfortunately, they kind of think that sex is about having babies, because it's very important for us in our culture to have babies, right? Our parents can't wait for the grandchildren, and there's a lot of pressure, and the woman just wants to kind of fall pregnant, and then once she has the baby, she's just interested in the baby and job done, right? Why does the husband still want to bother with me now? Some women are unfortunately like that. Our woman, no, I'm going to just say that straight out, dear ladies, no. Okay, no, don't do that. Okay, sex is not only about having babies. Sex is also about chastity. Okay, it is your job to keep your husband chaste. We live in a world where this man has access to a woman that he can be having sex with when you don't want to have sex with him. Okay? Do you want him to have sex outside of marriage? You don't. So it is your job to keep him chaste. And even if you don't feel like having sex, you need to humor him for the sake of your marriage and the integrity of your family, so this guy doesn't go looking elsewhere for it. Okay, your husband. So that is part of your marital duty towards your husband, and you should not lose sight of that because now you have a child. Okay. Now there are natural instances, of course, in our faith tradition where sex can't happen. For example, when you gave birth and now you are bleeding, that post-birth bleeding, you can't have sex obviously during that time. That lasts for a long period sometimes. It lasts for sometimes as little as a month, but sometimes a few months, you know. So you can't obviously have sex during that time. It doesn't mean that you can't have sexual play or sexual acts during that time. So if your husband is interested in you in that way, many husbands won't be, because they also they also getting into having a baby around, right? So both of you tend to be focused on the baby and less interested in that, but there's a good chance that he will become interested in that again faster than you can heal and recover. And if you are the only wife, then you have to come up with ways to humor him sexually, non-penetratively, without him having actual sex with you. So the only thing that's off limits to him is penetrating your vagina. That doesn't mean that you, the rest of you, is off limits, and you can come up with creative ways to humor him because that's your job. I mean, this is your husband. One of the things that became permissible for him when marrying you was access and ownership to your body sexually. And you can't decide that that's now not relevant because you now are incapable otherwise of doing that. Or if you genuinely are incapable of doing that, and or you don't really want to do it, you genuinely do not want to humor this man sexually because now you are preoccupied with children, etc., then you bring him another wife. Let someone else do it. Because that's what I guarantee you, he will either himself have another wife secretly somewhere. That's what men do these days because they don't feel like disrupting the family, so they do it secretly somewhere. And that later coming out later might disrupt your family life. It might be the type of woman that your family won't approve of, that you won't approve of. It might be the type of woman who isn't going to say no to sex, but then she has other issues, you know. So then you're going to be the loser in that instance. So if you genuinely cannot satisfy this man sexually now, you become preoccupied with other things that you feel are more important, and that's genuinely the case, find him another wife who can. Okay, because failing your duty means someone else has to step in. That's unfortunately the reality of the situation. You don't get to have a husband and not look after him. Okay, especially not in that way. And if you don't want to, well, then you need to outsource it. That's what will invariably happen, whether you like it or not. You might as well have some say in the matter. Okay, so the other thing also I wanted to point out is that sometimes taking a break from sex and sexual relations with your husband and or your wife is a good thing, because it helps to build up some sexual tension, to find each other more desirable in the long run, and also intermittently, meaning that, let's say, for example, I'm going to give you a concrete example. You have sex with your wife like every day. After 6 months, you're not going to find her that interesting to sleep with because you sleep with her every day, okay? So sometimes not sleeping with her, I mean, this happens not automatically in Ramadan time, that you have less sex, obviously, but that's once a year. But sometimes deliberately, as a man, obviously, not approaching your wife for sex for periods of time is a good thing, okay? You need to allow your wife to approach you for sex also. So this gives her agency. This also helps her understand that she still finds you desirable, because it's more often than not the case that women lose interest in sex, not so much that men lose interest in sex. Men would like to ordinarily have sex every day. And if you have a good wife, obviously, who understands her role, you can have sex every day with her. But I'm saying that you shouldn't. This is you shouldn't when you can help it. Okay? So you can stop at that point, stop for a little, and then resume. Thank you very much.